Do you have any idea whose table you are standing near? Evelyn Whitmore's voice cut through the ballroom just as the orchestra softened between songs. Hundreds of guests turned beneath crystal chandeliers, their conversations fading into a stunned hush. At the center of the Grand Meridian Ballroom, Monica Hayes stood beside the Whitmore family's reserved table in a midnight blue gown, her posture straight, her expression calm, one hand resting lightly against the small evening bag at her side. Across from her, Evelyn Whitmore looked flushed with outrage, her diamond earrings catching the light as she stared at Monica like she had personally ruined the evening. "I was invited," Monica said quietly. "Then whoever invited you made a mistake," Evelyn replied. The Whitmore Charity Gala had been advertised for months as the most important philanthropic event in the city. Politicians, developers, donors, and executives filled the room in black tuxedos and formal gowns. Along the walls, servers moved carefully with silver trays, their faces trained into professional calm. A massive screen behind the stage displayed images of the Whitmore family's proposed waterfront development, a project that promised luxury apartments, retail spaces, and jobs. Everyone in the room knew the number connected to that project: $1 billion. Everyone also knew the Whitmores were waiting for final funding approval before the end of the month. Monica had arrived without an entourage, without a press team, and without the kind of introduction that made strangers rush across a ballroom. She had simply checked in, accepted her place card, and walked toward the table assigned to her. That was enough for Evelyn to decide Monica did not belong. "This section is for principal donors," Evelyn said, lifting her chin. "Not people who wander in because they think a borrowed dress can open doors." A few guests looked away. Others pretended not to hear. Monica did not raise her voice. "My name is Monica Hayes. I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Evelyn gave a cold smile. "No, there has not." She stepped closer and made a sudden insulting gesture that left the room silent, but Monica did not respond with anger or retaliation. She took one measured breath, adjusted the sleeve of her gown, and looked toward the gala director standing near the stage. "Please document what just occurred," she said. Charles Whitmore, Evelyn's older brother and the head of Whitmore Holdings, rose from his chair with a glass of sparkling water in his hand. He wore a tuxedo that looked as expensive as the confidence in his voice. "What is going on here?" he asked. Evelyn turned toward him. "She is causing a scene at our table." Monica looked at Charles. "I was seated here by your event staff." Charles glanced at the place card, then at Monica, then back at Evelyn. He did not ask to see the guest list. He did not ask why the gala director had approached. He looked at Monica's dark skin, at the calm way she stood alone in a room built for people who arrived in groups, and made his own decision. "I am sure there is another table better suited for you," he said. The words were polite enough to pass as manners. The message beneath them was not. Near the edge of the ballroom, Tasha Reed, a young server balancing a tray of glasses, watched with growing unease. She had seen Evelyn confront Monica at the reception desk 20 minutes earlier. She had heard the sharp tone, the careless assumptions, the way staff members had gone quiet because the Whitmore name carried weight. Now, under the chandeliers, Monica looked from Charles to Evelyn and then toward the camera above the ballroom entrance. "Before anyone asks me to leave," she said, "you may want to review who you are speaking to." Charles smiled as if she had made an empty threat. "This is a private family event," he said. Monica's phone vibrated once in her evening bag. She did not look at it. Not yet. Instead, she held Charles's gaze and said, "No, Mr. Whitmore. Tonight is a public test of what your family believes dignity is worth." Charles Whitmore's smile held for only a second before it tightened at the corners. He was used to rooms changing when he spoke. Investors leaned closer. Staff moved faster. Guests laughed at jokes that were not especially funny. But Monica Hayes did not move. She stood beneath the chandelier light with the same quiet composure, while the gala director, Helen Park, hurried toward them from the stage. "Mr. Whitmore," Helen said carefully, "Ms. Hayes is listed at table 12. Charles glanced down at the place card again. The gold lettering was clear. Monica Hayes. Principal partner. Evelyn folded her arms. That does not explain why she is at our family table. Helen hesitated. The seating was arranged through the development committee. Charles looked annoyed. Then the committee made an error. Monica watched him without expression. The committee did not make an error. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice lowered but still sharp enough for nearby guests to hear. You are enjoying this, are you not? Standing here and making everyone uncomfortable. Monica's eyes remained steady. I am uncomfortable because I was publicly disrespected. Everyone else is uncomfortable because they saw it. That sentence traveled farther than a shout. A donor near the next table stopped pretending to read his program. Two members of the City Planning Commission exchanged uneasy looks. Tasha Reed stood near the service station, still holding her tray, watching Helen Park glance toward the cameras mounted near the ballroom entrance. Charles noticed the attention gathering around them and tried to reclaim control. This event is about charity, he said. Not personal accusations. Monica gave a small nod. Then let us act charitably. Ask the event staff to preserve the reception footage and the ballroom footage. Ask them to record the names of everyone who witnessed this exchange. Then we can discuss facts instead of appearances. Evelyn laughed once, without humor. You are acting like this is a courtroom. No, Monica said. I am acting like dignity deserves a record. Charles turned toward Helen. Do not let this become a spectacle. Helen looked at Monica, then at Evelyn, then at the growing circle of guests who had fallen silent. The cameras are already recording, she said. I will make sure the footage is preserved. Evelyn's face hardened. You work for us. Helen's voice was respectful, but firmer than before. I work for the Gala Foundation, Mrs. Whitmore. The distinction landed heavily. Charles looked toward the security team near the ballroom doors. Please escort Ms. Hayes to a quieter area until we can sort this out. Monica lifted one hand, not in alarm, but in refusal. I will not be escorted anywhere for asking that an incident be documented. The security staff stopped. They looked to Helen, who said nothing. For the first time that evening, Charles appeared uncertain. He lowered his voice. Ms. Hayes, whatever you think happened, we can resolve it privately. Monica's phone vibrated again. This time she took it from her bag and read the message. Her legal counsel had arrived in the lobby. The message was brief. The ethics review clause is ready if you want it activated. Monica slipped the phone back into her bag. Private resolutions are useful when everyone has been treated fairly, she said. They are not useful when privacy is being used to protect the people who caused the harm. Tasha took a careful step forward from the service station. Her hands trembled, but she kept her voice clear. I saw what happened at the reception desk, she said. Every face turned toward her. Evelyn stared at the young server as if she had forgotten that someone in a uniform could speak. Tasha swallowed. Mrs. Whitmore questioned Ms. Hayes before she even checked in. She said people like her were always trying to get into places they had not earned. The ballroom fell silent again. Charles looked at Evelyn. Evelyn's expression changed, not into regret, but into calculation. Monica looked at Tasha with quiet gratitude. Thank you, she said. Then she turned back to Charles. Now we can begin with the truth. For a moment, Charles Whitmore said nothing. The orchestra had stopped completely now, leaving only the faint clink of glassware from the far end of the ballroom. Tasha Reed stood near the service station with her tray lowered at her side, her face pale but determined. She had spent years learning how to disappear in rooms like this. Smile. Refill the glasses. Do not react when wealthy guests spoke as if the people serving them were part of the furniture. But she had heard Evelyn's words at the reception desk, and she had watched Monica stand alone beneath the chandeliers while everyone waited to see whether power would protect cruelty again. Evelyn recovered first. That is ridiculous, she said. I never said anything like that. Tasha looked down for a second, then raised her eyes. You did, she replied. You asked why she was on the guest list. You said the gala was becoming too easy to enter. Evelyn's expression sharpened. You are a server. You were probably confused. Monica turned toward Tasha before the young woman could answer. She is a witness, Monica said. Her job does not make her memory less credible. Charles lifted a hand, trying to slow the room down. This has gone far enough. Evelyn may have spoken poorly, but there is no reason to turn a charitable event into a public trial. Monica looked at him. No one turned this into a trial. Your family turned it into a test when you decided an invitation was not enough proof that I belonged. Charles's jaw tightened. And who exactly are you supposed to be? The question came out quieter than his earlier remarks, but it carried the same assumption. Monica reached into her evening bag and removed a small cream-colored card. She placed it on the table in front of him. Charles looked down. The card bore her name, her title, and the name of Hayes Capital Group. His eyes paused on the words, then lifted slowly back to her face. Evelyn leaned over his shoulder. Hayes Capital? She said. That is the investment firm. Monica nodded. Yes. A ripple passed through the guests closest to the table. Everyone involved in the waterfront project knew Hayes Capital Group. It was the firm that had spent 18 months conducting financial reviews, negotiating community benefit requirements, and preparing the final capital release for Whitmore Holdings. Charles stared at the card again. You are the chief executive officer? Monica's voice stayed level. I am. Evelyn gave a short, disbelieving laugh. That does not change anything. Monica looked at her. It changes nothing about what you should have done before you knew my title. But it changes what happens to the agreement your family has been waiting for. Charles's face lost color. The agreement is already settled. The financing is conditional, Monica said. Hayes Capital retains the right to pause funding if there is credible evidence that a project partner has violated the ethics and non-discrimination provisions. Charles took one step closer, lowering his voice. This is a misunderstanding. We can discuss it in private. Monica looked toward Helen Park, who was speaking quietly with the Gala Foundation attorney near the stage. Then she looked back at Charles. Your sister's behavior was witnessed. The footage is being preserved. And a staff member had to risk her own comfort to say what happened because no one else in this room wanted to challenge your family. Her phone vibrated again. This time, Monica read the message. Her general counsel was waiting in the lobby with the formal notice prepared. She placed the phone back in her bag. Mr. Whitmore, she said, I am activating the ethics review clause effective immediately. Charles stared at her. You cannot be serious. Monica held his gaze as the ballroom waited. I have never been more serious. Charles Whitmore looked at Monica as if the words had struck the air out of him. Around them, the Grand Meridian Ballroom had become painfully quiet. Guests who had come to celebrate generosity now stood beside their tables watching a family known for its wealth discover that money could not control every outcome. Evelyn Whitmore reached for Charles's arm. She is bluffing, she said, though her voice no longer carried the confidence it had moments earlier. She cannot stop a billion-dollar project because of one awkward exchange. Monica's expression did not change. This is not about one awkward exchange. It is about conduct, reputation, and whether your company can be trusted to honor the commitments it made to the communities affected by this project. Charles looked toward Helen Park. Call the development committee. Tell them there has been a misunderstanding. Helen stood near the stage with the foundation attorney, both watching the situation with careful concern. The committee has already been notified that the ethics review clause was activated, Helen said. Charles turned back to Monica. You did this before speaking to me? I spoke to you, Monica replied. You chose not to listen. The answer was quiet, but it landed harder than anger. Tasha Reed stood near the service station, still holding her tray. She watched Charles glance toward her, and for a moment she feared he would blame her for everything. Instead, Monica turned toward Tasha. Would you be willing to give a statement to the foundation attorney? Tasha swallowed. Yes. You will not be punished for telling the truth, Monica said. And if anyone attempts to retaliate against you, my office will know. Tasha nodded, her shoulders slowly easing. Evelyn stared at Monica with disbelief. You are making this about a server now? Monica looked at her. It was always about people you believed did not matter. Charles's phone began to ring. He looked at the screen, and his face tightened when he saw the name of Whitmore Holdings' chief financial officer. He stepped away from the table and answered in a low voice, but the tension in his posture told the room enough. Monica did not follow him. She stood still while the gala director directed guests back toward their tables and asked the orchestra to resume softly. Yet no one returned to normal conversation. The music sounded distant beneath the weight of what had just happened. A few minutes later, Charles came back with his phone still in his hand. The capital release has been paused, he said. They said Hayes Capital requires an independent review before any funds can move. Monica nodded once. That is correct. Do you understand what this does? Charles asked. Construction contracts are scheduled. Hundreds of jobs are tied to this. That is exactly why the review matters, Monica said. A project that claims to serve a city cannot be built on a culture that humiliates people in public and silences workers in private. Evelyn's face had gone pale. She looked around the ballroom, finally seeing the guests who had witnessed everything. Charles, she whispered, fix this. Charles looked at Monica again, but the certainty had left his eyes. What do you want? He asked. Monica took a slow breath. She remembered her mother coming home from catering events with sore feet and a forced smile, saying the guests had barely noticed she was there. She remembered promising herself that if she ever entered rooms like this, she would not become someone who looked away. I want the truth preserved, Monica said. I want an independent investigation. I want every worker connected to this gala protected from retaliation. And I want your family to understand that a public apology is not the same thing as accountability. Charles lowered his eyes. For the first time that night he had no answer. The silence around Charles Whitmore seemed to grow heavier with every second. The orchestra continued playing somewhere near the stage, but its music no longer belonged to the room. Guests stood in clusters beneath the chandeliers, speaking in whispers behind raised glasses. Some looked at Monica with admiration. Others looked at the Whitmore family with the uneasy expression of people realizing they had spent years excusing behavior they would never accept from anyone without money. Evelyn remained beside her brother, her shoulders rigid. This is completely unreasonable, she said. You are holding an entire development hostage because you want to make an example of us. Monica turned toward her. No. Your family created the example. I am deciding whether my firm will attach its name and capital to it. Charles looked toward the large screen behind the stage, where the waterfront development continued to rotate in elegant digital images. Luxury towers. Public green space. A promised community center. The presentation had been designed to make everyone believe the project was already inevitable. Now it looked fragile. The agreement has safeguards, Charles said. We have compliance policies. We have community commitments. Monica nodded. Policies are not proof. Commitments are not proof. What matters is how people behave when they believe no one important is watching. Tasha Reed stood beside Helen Park and the foundation attorney, preparing to give her statement. She looked nervous, but she was no longer alone. 2 other staff members had quietly joined her near the service station. One had worked the reception desk. The other had seen Evelyn confront Monica before the ballroom doors opened. Helen looked at them with surprise. Were you both there? The receptionist nodded. Mrs. Whitmore asked us why Ms. Hayes had been allowed through. The second staff member looked toward Charles, then spoke softly. She said the donor floor was not for people who looked like they needed directions. Charles closed his eyes for a brief moment. Evelyn turned sharply toward them. That is not what I said. But the words sounded weaker now, surrounded by too many witnesses. Monica watched the staff members with quiet respect. You do not have to say anything you are not comfortable saying, she told them. But if you choose to speak, the record will protect you. The Foundation attorney nodded. The statements will be taken confidentially, and the Gala Foundation will enforce its non-retaliation policy. Charles looked at Monica. What exactly happens now? His voice had changed. It no longer carried the assumption that he could end the conversation whenever he chose. Monica opened her evening bag and removed a slim folder. Inside was a formal notice from Hayes Capital Group. She handed it to him. The funding pause remains in place while an independent review examines the conduct of Whitmore Holdings, its leadership, and its event practices. The review will also determine whether the project's community commitments can be trusted. Charles scanned the first page, then looked up. This could take months. It could, Monica said. That depends on how transparent your family is willing to be. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice suddenly softer. Monica, I am sorry. I was upset. I did not mean for any of this to happen. Monica studied her for a moment. You did not mean for witnesses to speak. You did not mean for your brother to learn who I was. But you did mean the way you treated me. Evelyn looked away. Charles held the folder in both hands. Tell us what would make this right. Monica looked toward Tasha and the other staff members, then toward the guests who had finally stopped pretending this was not their concern. Making it right begins with more than saving a deal, she said. It begins with admitting that respect is not something people earn by becoming powerful enough to punish you. Monica let the words settle before she spoke again. The guests closest to the Whitmore table had stopped pretending to admire the floral arrangements or study the auction catalog. They were listening now, not because the room had become louder, but because Monica had made silence impossible to hide inside. Charles Whitmore held the formal notice in both hands. His tuxedo was still perfect, his cuff links still caught the chandelier light, but the certainty he had worn all evening was gone. We will cooperate, he said. We will provide whatever documents the review requires. Monica nodded. Cooperation is the beginning. It is not the conclusion. Evelyn looked toward the ballroom doors, as if she could still leave before the consequences became real. But every path out of the room seemed visible now. Helen Park approached with the Foundation attorney, carrying a small tablet and a folder. The footage has been secured, Helen said. The staff statements are being documented. We have also contacted the board of the Foundation. Charles gave a tired nod. Fine. The attorney looked at Monica. Ms. Hayes, your counsel is here. Near the entrance, a woman in a dark formal suit stood waiting with a leather portfolio. Her name was Renee Carter, General Counsel for Hayes Capital Group. She did not rush forward or demand attention. She simply walked across the ballroom with the calm focus of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. Monica greeted her with a quiet nod. Renee opened the portfolio and handed Charles a second document. This confirms the temporary suspension of capital release, she said. No funds will be transferred until the independent ethics review is completed and the investment committee determines whether Whitmore Holdings remains eligible under the agreement. Charles read the page, then looked at Renee. You are freezing $1 billion. Renee's voice was professional. The funds are paused. The project has not been cancelled. The outcome will depend on the findings and your company's response. Evelyn looked at Monica with a mixture of fear and frustration. You could make this disappear. Monica met her eyes. That is the problem. People with power have made things disappear for too long. Tasha stood beside the Foundation attorney, watching every word. She had expected to be told to return to work by now. Instead, Helen Park asked whether she needed a private room before giving her statement. Tasha nodded, grateful but overwhelmed. Monica noticed. Tasha, she said, before you go, I want you to know that you did not create this situation. You told the truth about it. Tasha's eyes shone. I was scared. Courage can be scared, Monica said. It just refuses to stay silent. Charles looked toward Tasha, then toward the other staff members who had stepped forward. His voice was lower when he spoke. I did not know this was happening. Monica held his gaze. You did not know because your family never had to ask. The words did not accuse him with anger. They asked him to see the distance between his world and theirs. Charles looked down at the paused funding notice. What will the review require? Monica turned toward Renee, then back to him. Full access to leadership communications connected to the project. Independent interviews with employees, contractors, and community representatives. A public commitment to protect workers from retaliation. And if the project moves forward, binding standards for fair hiring, community oversight, and non-discrimination. Evelyn gave a quiet, bitter laugh. You are turning a Gala mistake into an entire corporate restructuring. Monica's expression remained calm. No. I am refusing to treat a pattern like a mistake. Beyond the ballroom windows, the city lights reflected against the dark glass. Inside, the Whitmore family stood surrounded by the evidence of a truth they had never expected to face. And for the first time that evening, Charles did not ask how to save the deal. He asked, What do we need to do first? Monica looked at Charles Whitmore for a long moment before answering. The question sounded simple, but she knew it was not. What do we need to do first? For people like Charles, first steps had always meant strategy. A statement to calm investors. A donation to quiet criticism. A private call to someone powerful enough to smooth over the damage. But the ballroom was still full of people who had seen what happened, and the staff members near the service station were no longer invisible. First, Monica said, you stop treating this as a problem to manage. Charles nodded slowly. Then what is it? It is a responsibility to face. Renee Carter stood beside Monica with the legal portfolio open in her hands. The review team will begin tomorrow morning, she said. Whitmore Holdings will receive a preservation notice tonight. No relevant messages, records, or communications may be deleted or altered. Charles accepted the notice without protest. Evelyn watched him, then looked at Monica. And what happens to me? Her voice was quieter now. It was the first question she had asked that did not sound like an attempt to control the answer. Monica did not rush to respond. That will depend on what you are willing to acknowledge and what the review finds. Evelyn's eyes moved toward Tasha, who was speaking privately with the foundation attorney. I said things I should not have said. Monica held her gaze. You did more than say things you should not have said. You treated a woman as if she needed to prove she belonged before you would offer basic respect. Then you tried to dismiss the people who witnessed it. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Charles placed the funding notice on the table. We will issue a statement tonight, he said. We will apologize. Monica nodded once. A statement should name the harm without making excuses. It should not ask the public to forgive you before you have done the work. Charles looked at Renee. Can your office help us draft it? Renee's expression stayed professional. Our office represents Hayes Capital. You will need independent counsel. That answer made Charles pause. For perhaps the first time, he understood that Monica was not there to repair his family's image. She was there to protect standards they had failed to honor. Helen Park returned from the foundation office with a printed notice. The board has voted to open an independent inquiry into the Gala incident and the foundation's relationship with Whitmore Holdings, she said. Until the inquiry is complete, the Whitmore family will not represent the foundation publicly. Evelyn looked stunned. This is our foundation. Helen's face was composed. It belongs to the community it serves. The words echoed through the ballroom. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded. Tasha returned from her meeting with the attorney, her tray gone now, her hands free at her sides. Monica turned toward her. Are you all right? Tasha nodded, though her voice trembled. I think so. They said I can take the rest of the night off. You should, Monica said. And tomorrow, someone from my office will contact you about support and representation, if you want it. Tasha looked at her with disbelief. Why would you do that for me? Monica's expression softened. Because people should not have to stand alone after they tell the truth. Charles listened without interrupting. He looked around the ballroom at the servers, the foundation staff, the donors, and the guests who had watched his family's authority unravel. Then he faced Monica again. "We will cooperate with the review," he said. "We will provide access. We will meet the conditions." Monica picked up her evening bag. "Good," she said. "Then tomorrow, you begin proving that your values are more than words printed on a Gala program." As she turned toward the ballroom doors, the orchestra began a slow instrumental piece. But no one mistook it for a return to normal. The night had changed, and every person in the room knew that the real work would begin after the lights went down. The next morning, the ballroom was gone, but its silence had followed Monica into the offices of Hayes Capital Group. From the 32nd floor, the city looked clean and distant beneath a pale sky. Inside the conference room, nothing felt distant. Renee Carter sat across from Monica with a team of compliance specialists, community advisors, and independent investigators. On the wall screen, the first preservation notices from Whitmore Holdings appeared one after another. Confirmed. 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 Monica read each acknowledgement without celebration. A paused billion-dollar deal was not justice by itself. It was only leverage. What mattered was what people did when they no longer had the option of pretending nothing happened. "The first interviews are scheduled," Renee said. "Foundation staff, event staff, project contractors, and Whitmore leadership." Monica nodded. "Make sure every worker knows they can speak privately. No one should have to choose between telling the truth and keeping a paycheck." Across town, Charles Whitmore sat in the executive conference room of Whitmore Holdings with Evelyn beside him and a row of attorneys at the far end of the table. The formal statement had been released before sunrise. It acknowledged the incident at the Gala and promised cooperation with the independent inquiry. But the message had not brought relief. Reporters were calling. Community groups were asking questions. Investors wanted to know whether the waterfront project would survive. Charles stared at the city permit timeline projected on the screen. Every date had suddenly become uncertain. "We need to protect the project," one attorney said. Evelyn looked at her brother. "We need to protect the family." Charles did not answer immediately. The words sounded similar, but he was beginning to understand they were not. A project could survive a delayed funding release. A family reputation built on avoiding accountability might not. "We protect it by telling the truth," he finally said. Evelyn turned toward him. "You are going to let them define us by one night?" Charles looked at her. "One night did not create this. One night revealed it." Back at Hayes Capital, Tasha Reed arrived for her interview wearing a simple navy blouse and dark slacks. She had expected a cold legal office and difficult questions. Instead, Monica met her in a smaller room with warm light, a pitcher of water, and no cameras. "You can stop at any time," Monica said. "You can ask for a break. You can have an advocate present." Tasha sat down slowly. "I keep thinking I should have said something sooner." Monica took the chair across from her. "You spoke when you could. That matters." Tasha looked down at her hands. "At events like that, people say things all the time. About staff. About people they think do not belong. We learn to smile because we need the hours." Monica listened without interrupting. "How often?" she asked gently. Tasha gave a small, tired laugh. "Often enough that no one is surprised anymore." The answer stayed in the room. Monica thought of her mother's long shifts, her aching feet, and the ways she had learned to make herself smaller around people who had never bothered to learn her name. She had built Hayes Capital to move money toward communities, but she knew money alone could not repair the habits that taught people their dignity was negotiable. "Your statement will be part of the record," Monica said. "But I also want it to shape the solution." Tasha looked up. "What solution?" Monica's voice was steady. "A worker protection program tied to every project we fund. Independent reporting, paid time to participate in investigations, and clear consequences for retaliation. For the first time since entering the room, Tasha's expression changed. Not into certainty. Not yet. But into the beginning of hope. Outside, the city kept moving toward another busy day. Inside, the real cost of the gala was finally being counted, not in headlines or delayed dollars, but in the stories people had been carrying alone. By the end of the first week, the Independent Review had gathered more than the gala footage and Tasha Reid's statement. Emails from Foundation staff showed repeated concerns about how Whitmore family representatives treated workers at events. Contractors described meetings where community partners were spoken over, then praised publicly for agreements they had not been allowed to shape. A former project coordinator shared notes from a planning session in which Charles had dismissed a neighborhood leader as too emotional, after she questioned whether affordable housing promises would be honored. None of the evidence alone explained everything. Together, it formed a picture that was harder to deny. In the Hayes Capitol conference room, Renee Carter placed the preliminary report in front of Monica. The review is finding a pattern of leadership behavior that creates risk, she said. Not only reputational risk, contractual risk, community trust risk. Monica turned the pages slowly. She had seen companies try to separate their public values from their private behavior. They called one side branding and the other side business. But the people affected by their decisions did not have the luxury of making that distinction. What is Charles saying? Monica asked. Renee looked at her notes. He has agreed to a full interview. Evelyn has retained separate counsel. The Whitmore board is asking whether they can propose a corrective action plan before the investment committee makes a final decision. Monica looked toward the window. The waterfront project had been promised to neighborhoods that had waited years for investment. She did not want a delayed deal to become another broken promise made to people who had already been asked to wait too long. But she would not release $1 billion into a structure that treated accountability like a public relations problem. They can propose a plan, she said. But it must be built with the people affected by the project, not written behind closed doors. Later that afternoon, Charles arrived at Hayes Capitol with his attorney. He no longer wore a tuxedo or carried the polished ease of the gala. He wore a dark suit, a plain tie, and an expression that looked tired from days of difficult calls. Monica met him in a conference room with Renee and 2 independent investigators. Charles sat down, placed his hands on the table, and waited. I have read the preliminary findings, he said. I understand why the funding was paused. Monica watched him carefully. Do you understand why the funding was paused, or do you understand why people stopped trusting you? Charles looked down. Both. The answer was not perfect, but it was more honest than the words he had used at the gala. My family built Whitmore Holdings by believing results mattered more than feelings, he continued. I thought that was discipline. I see now that it gave people permission to ignore anyone who made them uncomfortable. Monica said nothing for a moment. Then she asked, What will you do differently when the cameras are gone? Charles looked at the report between them. I will step back from project leadership while the review continues. I will recommend an independent community oversight board. And I will make the worker protections you proposed binding conditions, not optional programs. Renee made a note. Monica studied Charles's face. Those are commitments, she said. The question is whether you will accept consequences if you fail to keep them. Charles nodded. Yes. At that moment, Monica's phone lit up with a message from Tasha. She had agreed to join the first worker advisory meeting, but she had added one sentence at the end. I do not want them to choose me because I spoke up. I want them to listen to everyone. Monica read the message twice. Then she placed the phone on the table and looked at Charles. That is where we begin, she said. Not with one apology. With a system where no one has to become brave just to be treated like a person. The first worker advisory meeting took place on a rainy Tuesday in a community center 3 miles from the waterfront site. Monica chose the location deliberately. Not a hotel ballroom. Not a corporate conference room with glass walls and catered lunches. The room had folding chairs, a long table, coffee and paper cups, and windows that looked out over a neighborhood that had heard promises from developers before. Tasha Reed arrived early and sat near the middle of the table, not at the front. Beside her were hotel workers, construction apprentices, small business owners, neighborhood advocates, and representatives from local tenant groups. Charles Whitmore entered 10 minutes later with 2 members of his board and no entourage. He wore a dark suit, but he left his jacket folded over one arm before taking a seat among the others. The gesture did not erase anything, but it showed he understood that this meeting was not his stage. Monica sat across from him with Renee Carter and the independent review team. "This is not a presentation," Monica said as the room settled. "No one is here to sell a plan. We are here to hear what a responsible plan must include." For the first few minutes, no one spoke. Then an older woman named Gloria Bennett, who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, placed both hands on the table. "Every developer says jobs," she said. "Then they hire people from somewhere else. Every developer says affordable housing, then they call it affordable because it is cheaper than the luxury units." Charles started to answer, but Monica raised one hand slightly. Not to silence him forever. Only to make sure Gloria finished. "We have been studied, surveyed, and photographed," Gloria continued. "What we have not been is respected." Tasha looked at Monica, then spoke. "Workers need protection before they speak, not after something happens. We need clear reporting channels that do not go through the same managers we are afraid of. We need paid time for interviews. We need to know that if we say something, our hours will not disappear next week." Renee wrote every word. Charles did not interrupt. A young construction apprentice named Malik Johnson leaned forward. "And we need real apprenticeships," he said. "Not one photo opportunity and then nothing." The room grew more direct after that. People spoke about wages, accessibility, local hiring, childcare, public transit, and the fear that the project would raise rents until long-time residents could no longer afford to live nearby. Monica listened to each person with the same attention she had demanded for Tasha at the gala. When the discussion paused, she turned toward Charles. "You asked what you need to do first," she said. "This is it. You listen without deciding in advance which concerns are reasonable." Charles looked around the table. "I understand," he said. Gloria shook her head gently. "No," she replied. "You are beginning to understand." Charles accepted the correction without protest. Monica opened a folder containing a draft set of conditions. "Hayes Capital will not consider releasing funds until these protections are written into binding agreements," she said. "Independent worker reporting. Community oversight. Local hiring targets. Affordable housing enforcement. Public progress reports. And consequences if commitments are ignored." Charles read the list slowly. The room waited for him to argue. Instead, he set the pages down. "Put them in the agreement," he said. Tasha looked at him, then at Monica. The rain tapped softly against the windows. Nothing had been fixed in one meeting. But for the first time, the people who would live with the consequences were helping write the terms. The meeting ended without applause. No one expected it to. The people in the community center gathered their notes, folded umbrellas, and carried their questions back into the rain, but the terms they had placed on the table remained. They would become part of the project, or the project would not move forward. Monica Hayes stayed behind with Renee Carter while Charles Whitmore reviewed the draft conditions one more time. Tasha Reed stood near the coffee station, speaking quietly with Gloria Bennett and Malik Johnson. For the first time since the gala, she did not look like someone waiting for permission to leave. Charles looked up from the papers. "My board will resist some of this," he said. Monica nodded. "Then your board will have to decide what kind of company it wants to be." Charles ran a hand across the edge of the document. "They will say these requirements make the project too expensive. Respect costs less than repairing harm," Monica said. "And if a project only works by ignoring the people it affects, then it was never a sound project." Renee placed the new document in front of Charles. It was the independent review's interim findings. The report did not make accusations beyond what the evidence supported, but it was clear about the failures. Whitmore Holdings had weak reporting protections. Several contractors had no reliable process for raising concerns. The foundation had allowed the family name to carry more influence than its own standards. And the Gala incident had exposed a culture where staff members felt safer staying quiet than speaking honestly. Charles read the report slowly. "What happens to Evelyn?" he asked. Monica looked at Renee before answering. "The review will determine her role based on the evidence and her response. She will have due process. But she cannot represent the foundation or the project while the inquiry is active." Charles nodded, though the answer clearly hurt. "She is my sister. And Tasha is someone's daughter," Monica said. "Every worker in that room is part of a family too." Charles lowered his eyes. Across the room, Tasha heard the words but did not turn around. She simply stood a little straighter. Later that evening, Charles returned to the Whitmore family office, where Evelyn waited near the window. She had spent the day reading public reactions to the gala and receiving calls from friends who wanted to know whether the reports were true. "What did they demand?" she asked. Charles set the documents on the desk. "They demanded standards we should have had before this ever happened." Evelyn looked away. "And you agreed?" "I agreed to listen," Charles said. "There is a difference." Evelyn's expression tightened. "You are letting Monica Hayes control everything." Charles looked at his sister with a tired sadness. "No. She is refusing to let us control everything." The next morning, the Whitmore board convened in an emergency session. Several directors argued that the funding pause had already damaged the company's reputation. Others worried that accepting the conditions would set a precedent for future projects. Charles listened until the room quieted. Then he stood. "The precedent is that our commitments mean something," he said. "If we cannot accept that, then we do not deserve this investment." One director asked whether he was prepared to step aside from the project. Charles looked at the interim report on the table. "If that is what accountability requires, yes." At Hayes Capital, Monica received the minutes from the board meeting. She read Charles's statement once, then placed the papers beside the worker protection draft. Renee watched her. "Do you believe him?" she asked. Monica looked toward the city beyond the window. "I believe change is not proven by one statement," she said. "It is proven by what people are willing to give up when doing the right thing becomes expensive." 2 weeks after the community meeting, the independent review reached its final stage. The report was delivered to Hayes Capital, the Whitmore Board, the Gala Foundation, and the Community Oversight Group at the same time. It was not written to embarrass anyone. It was written to make evasion impossible. The findings confirmed that the Gala incident was not an isolated lapse in judgment. It reflected a broader pattern in which Whitmore leadership had treated staff concerns as inconveniences, allowed family influence to override foundation procedures, and failed to build reliable protections for workers and community partners. The report also noted that Charles Whitmore had cooperated fully after the investigation began, while Evelyn Whitmore had initially minimized her conduct before later providing a formal statement acknowledging the harm she caused. Monica read the report in her office before sunrise. The city outside was still dark, its streets quiet beneath the first pale light of morning. Renee Carter stood beside the conference table with the final funding recommendation. "The review team believes the project can move forward only if the conditions are binding and independently monitored," she said. Monica looked at the pages spread before her. "And the Whitmore board?" "They accepted the conditions," Renee replied. Charles stepped away from direct project leadership. The board appointed an independent chair for the development committee. Evelyn resigned from the foundation board and agreed not to represent the project publicly. Monica was silent for a moment. None of it erased the night at the gala. None of it erased the years of people who had learned to stay quiet. But consequences were not meant to erase the past. They were meant to change what became possible afterward. Later that morning, the final meeting was held in the same community center where the first advisory session had taken place. Tasha Reed sat beside Gloria Bennett and Malik Johnson, not as a server waiting for instructions, but as a member of the new Worker and Community Oversight Council. Charles arrived without an attorney. He took a seat at the far end of the table and waited until everyone else had spoken. Monica entered with Renee and the investment committee. The room became quiet, but it was not the fearful silence of the gala. It was the silence of people who understood their voices mattered in the decision ahead. Monica opened the meeting. "The funding pause will be lifted only after the revised agreement is signed," she said. "The agreement includes independent worker reporting, paid time for employees who participate in investigations, local hiring requirements, enforceable affordable housing commitments, public progress reports, and a community council with the authority to raise concerns directly to the investment committee." Gloria looked at the document in front of her. "And if they do not follow through?" Monica answered without hesitation. "The agreement includes financial penalties, public disclosure requirements, and the right to suspend future funding." Charles nodded slowly. "We accept those terms." Tasha looked across the table at him. "Why now?" she asked. The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of every worker who had been told to stay in the background. Charles did not look away. "Because I spent too long believing that being respected was the same as being right," he said. "It is not." Tasha considered his answer, then nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Monica placed the final agreement in the center of the table. "This project will not be judged by the promises made today," she said. "It will be judged by whether people are safer, heard, and included after the cameras are gone." One by one, the documents were signed. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight moved across the wet pavement. The deal was no longer simply a billion-dollar development. It had become a test of whether power could be tied to responsibility, and whether a room that once tried to silence one woman could learn to make space for everyone. 6 months later, the waterfront site looked different from the polished images that had once glowed behind the stage at the Whitmore Charity Gala. Construction had begun, but the fences around the property displayed more than architectural renderings. They listed local hiring targets, community meeting dates, worker reporting information, and the names of the Independent Oversight Council members. The words were plain, but they represented promises that could now be measured. Tasha Reed stood near the entrance wearing a hard hat and a bright safety vest over her coat. She was no longer working gala shifts. After joining the Worker and Community Oversight Council, she had accepted a full-time role coordinating employee support and reporting access for the project. Gloria Bennett walked beside her, reviewing the latest housing compliance update. Malik Johnson had started a paid apprenticeship with one of the construction firms and was learning how to read site plans from a supervisor who knew his name. Monica Hayes arrived without an announcement, dressed in a dark tailored coat and low heels, carrying the same quiet focus she had carried into the ballroom months earlier. She stopped near the information board and read every line. Tasha noticed her and smiled. "The first worker meeting is in 10 minutes, she said. Monica looked at the growing group of employees, residents, and contractors gathering beneath a temporary canopy. "Then we should not keep them waiting," she replied. Inside the meeting tent, Charles Whitmore sat at the side of the table rather than at its head. He was no longer leading the project, but he attended each oversight session when invited, listened to the reports, and answered questions about the commitments his company had signed. He looked older than he had at the gala, though perhaps it was only that he no longer hid behind certainty. When Monica entered, he stood. "Ms. Hayes," he said. Monica nodded. "Mr. Whitmore." There was no warmth in the exchange, but there was clarity. Charles looked toward the people filling the chairs. "The latest report shows we met the first local hiring target," he said. "We also received 3 worker concerns through the independent system, and all 3 are being reviewed." Tasha added, "2 of those concerns came from people who asked to remain anonymous. The process is working because they know they can speak without losing their jobs." Monica looked around the tent. No one applauded. Accountability was not a performance. It was a practice. After the meeting, Charles approached Monica near the edge of the site. I have thought about that night more times than I can count, he said. I thought power meant people would listen when I spoke. I did not understand that leadership meant listening when I did not want to hear. Monica looked toward the workers moving across the site, toward Tasha helping a new employee find the reporting office, toward Gloria speaking with a housing advocate. Understanding is only useful when it changes what you do, she said. Charles nodded. I know. Monica began walking toward the gate, then paused. You did not need to know who I was to treat me with respect, she said. That was true at the gala, and it is true for every person who enters this project. Charles lowered his eyes. I understand. Monica stepped through the gate and into the afternoon light. Behind her, the city moved forward, brick by brick, meeting by meeting, decision by decision. The deal had survived, but it had not survived unchanged. It had become something larger than a number on a contract. It had become proof that dignity cannot be bought, silence cannot be demanded, and real power is measured by the space you make for people whose voices were once ignored.